access for me, and now I will work every day to ensure that that same access is provided to anyone who wants it. That we have multiple pathways to opportunities, and that we're leaving no student behind. Right now, I serve on the Committee of Education and Labor, which is on purpose. I went to Congress with one very specific task, and it was to ensure that we were creating opportunities, access to opportunities for all kids from all communities. Right now, we've had some really intense hearings on some of the proposed budget cuts to education, to public education funding. I can tell you that in me, you have a champion for programs like TRIO, for programs like Gear Up, for making sure that we are reducing student debt and predatory lenders, for making sure that our schools and our communities are not being taken advantage of, and that kids, young people are graduating with the skills and the tools that they need to be successful in this economy and in this society, and I will fight for that at every turn. I have heard people say, and it really is, it's so diminishing and devaluing to hear some of the conversations that occur about our communities, about the choices that people make or the paths that people find themselves on. And I have to remind people at every turn, nobody chooses to struggle. Nobody chooses this trajectory. But our responsibility as leaders, as the adults, as the community, is to hold people up until they can stand on their own and then send them off so that they can pull someone behind them. That's what I believe in. That's what happened in my life, where people stepped in. And I have to tell you, it wasn't always people who looked like me, who sounded like me, or who shared my circumstances. But it was people who did the right thing just because it was the right thing to do. You know, everything I learned about school, I learned at school. And we have so many people who touch down on campuses like this and for the first time are having real conversations with fidelity about controlling the narrative about their education. Just because they're not having those conversations at home doesn't mean their families don't care about them. Maybe it means, just maybe, that they don't have the ability or the capacity to control those conversations. I grew up in a family where my grandmother could not have been more loving, could not have been more giving, could not have been more invested in my success. But she didn't know how to translate that level of investment, that level of commitment, that love she had for me into a conversation that was academic. So as a teacher, I always stood on the premise that it's not kids' responsibility to learn different. It's my responsibility to teach different. And I think that as long as we always lead with that everybody has value, that everybody has a gift, that everybody gets to be here and should have access, it's crazy because this is so raw for me. This is so real to me because there were so many people who said to me at so many points in my life or made me feel like I didn't belong in a room or belong in a place. There were so many people at the point where I was a high school dropout, where I was a teenage mom, where I was a community college student who had just given up on me and written me off. And I tell you, we can't write people off. We can't decide that they're done. What we have to do is figure out how to put them back on track and get them in the pipeline and on the road to success. And that road is going to look different for everybody. There are different ways of being and doing. And once you are graced with, when I started this journey, I did it because I have been the beneficiary of so much undeserved grace. And now I have a responsibility. I have a responsibility to use my voice, to use my platform, to use my experiences, to use my struggle to help ensure that somebody, even if it's one person, does not have to endure the same things. To help change hearts and minds so that the people on the other side who have already made up their minds and have an opinion of who certain groups are and what certain groups do and how certain groups feel and about how people act, to help them change that opinion. I sat in a committee the other day and they talked about preserving programs for able-bodied young adults who are receiving SNAP benefits. And there were people who talked about people just don't want to work and they don't want to do anything. And I had to remind them that I was a SNAP beneficiary, but not because I didn't want to work, because I was underemployed, working 3 jobs, going to college full-time. So when you think about a person who receives SNAP benefits, I hope that you now begin to think that that person can also be a congresswoman. There are so many people in this room. There are so many people on this campus. There are so many people in this community who are in the journey. It is amazing the reception that the cleaned up version of me gets. But I have to tell you, I'm not here in spite of my journey. I'm here because of my journey. And what I hope that every person, every administrator, every adult in this room does is recognize that sometimes we have to stand in intercession for young people until they can stand on their own. Sometimes we have to realize the promise in their potential before they even recognize it themselves. Sometimes we have to pour life into them and invest into them as people before they even begin to see themselves as value. I promise you, the dividends of those investments will pay 10 times over, because those people then begin to understand that they too have a responsibility to do the same for someone else. And if everybody just starts to decide that I'm going to do my part, I can't control everything around me, but I'm going to do my part to make sure that every opportunity that a young person has on this campus, every experience, every interaction leaves them better than when they came. You have no idea what we can do. You have no idea what we can do. And then the last thing I'll leave you with is the last 3 years of my life have been crazy. Like crazy. But there's one thing that I remember that I really didn't even appreciate until now. When I became the Connecticut Teacher of the Year, they said you have to give a speech. And I wasn't used to public speaking or talking in front of groups, and I was like, what will I talk about? I don't know what to say. And they said to me, generally what the Teacher of the Year talks about is the teacher that impacted them, or the one teacher they remember. And I was like, oh my God, I always knew I wanted to be a teacher, so there's all of these teachers. But there was a teacher that stood up, that it popped to the top of my mind, and it's the teacher that I spoke about. Problem is, it was a teacher that said something to me in 4th grade that was so incredibly painful about my family. My grandmother hadn't come to open house. It seems inconsequential now, but the fact that I still remember this 35 years later is probably the most telling. My grandma didn't come to open house because we didn't have a car. My grandmother was raising my brother and I. And I remember, you know how we do. Before open house, you put all of your best work in a folder and you leave it on your desk and you decorate it and you put it in. And I remember the next day trying to hurry into school to move this folder so that no one would see that it was still there. Because your parents are supposed to take the folder the night before. And I overheard my teacher in the hallway saying to someone else, how many parents did you get? Who came? And she says, well, you know who didn't come. They never come. So I'm looking around the room, and the only folder there is mine. So she was talking about my grandmother. 35 years later, when I'm being celebrated at the height of my profession, that was the teacher I remember. I say that to you because every single one of you is somebody's hero, and you don't even realize it. When I wanted to fill out a FAFSA form, it was the secretary in the office who stayed after with me and filled it out. When I was working nights and going to school full-time at Southern Connecticut State University, it was the bus driver who waited for me at the stop to get me to my building across campus on time. Every single one of you plays a critical and important part in the journey that these young people are on. And I can tell you that you get to decide how they will remember you. Will you be the person who brushed somebody aside and made them feel this small, even though they were being celebrated at the height of their career? Or will you be the person that shined a light and created an opportunity and made them feel that their journey and their experiences and their family was important, and you cared about them, and they were important enough to you for you to stand in intercession until they could stand on their own? You get to decide which one of those memories you will be. Don't take that lightly. Don't take that lightly, because it's life-changing. The investment you make now is life-changing. So no matter what that investment is, whether you are the mentor or the professor or the person who's just saying good morning, we're great to have you here today, understand that you are creating a memory, that you are creating an experience, and all of those things put together create our next generation of leaders. Thank you so much. It was great to meet you.